Is Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate completely overpowered? Does it give you endless endurance without raising your hematocrit or red blood cell count, otherwise turning your blood into gravy? Does it enhance your cognition and productivity by increasing oxygen delivery to the brain just like it does for skeletal muscle? Keep watching to find out more about ITPP. Vigorous Steve here. Let's talk about Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, abbreviated to ITPP, a compound you're completely sleeping on, a compound which is known to boost endurance and stamina tremendously, especially if you combine it with nasal strips, methylene blue, the peak O2 adaptogen mushroom blend, and Cardarine or Mildronate, potentially. Give the Endless Endurance video a watch in case you're not up to speed. Don't worry, this video is all about Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, combining the limited scientific evidence with a healthy amount of anecdotal experience to fill in the blanks. Since Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate increases the oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin found within red blood cells and thus enhances oxygen delivery to metabolically active tissues like skeletal muscle or the brain, it's very important for you to understand what hemoglobin does and how modulation can enhance your endurance and stamina overall. Hemoglobin is the active component within red blood cells, giving blood its distinct red color. Hemoglobin contains a hemogroup with iron, which allows for oxygen binding. Hemoglobin exists in two states. In the tense state, it has low oxygen affinity, but in the relaxed state, it has high oxygen affinity. Hemoglobin is responsible for oxygen transport through the bloodstream, again contained within red blood cells. It carries oxygen from the lungs to tissues throughout the body. Each hemoglobin molecule can bind up to 4 oxygen molecules. Now, an oxygen molecule contains 2 oxygen atoms, so that means the transport of 8 oxygen atoms for every single hemoglobin molecule. The normal oxygen binding capacity of hemoglobin is between 1.34 milliliters to 1.39 milliliters of oxygen per 1 gram of hemoglobin. It also transports carbon dioxide from tissues back to the lungs for expulsion. Normal carbon dioxide binding capacity of hemoglobin is 0.061 milliliters carbon dioxide per 1 gram of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin also facilitates the transport of various ions through the bloodstream, including carbonic acid, bicarbonate ions, hydrogen ions, all contributing to the serum acid-base balance. Now, if you guys remember from the Endless Endurance video where I discussed baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, or beta-alanine converting into L-carnosine, all helping with the acid buffer within skeletal muscle or the acid buffer within the bloodstream, if hemoglobin content is significantly elevated, allowing for hydrogen ion transport throughout the bloodstream and thus contributing to the acid-base balance, assuming that your red blood cell count contains a lot of hemoglobin and your red blood cell count is somewhere towards the top of the reference range, just like your hematocrit is, then that means that the acid-base balance is more sustained and your endurance and stamina through the removal of these metabolic waste products is significantly heightened as well. Hemoglobin indirectly contributes to nitric oxide transport. Nitric oxide binds to the iron-containing hemogroup of hemoglobin, forming nitrosyl hemoglobin, and nitric oxide also binds to the cysteine residue of hemoglobin, forming S-nitrosyl hemoglobin. Then nitric oxide is released at the same time as oxygen is to metabolically active tissue, whether that's the brain or skeletal muscle for that matter. And hemoglobin also binds various toxic molecules, including carbon monoxide, nitrite ions, cyanides, sulfur monoxide, and sulfide. The body naturally produces carbon monoxide as a byproduct in the breakdown of heme or other hemoproteins through the enzyme heme-oxidase. Carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin with approximately 240 times the affinity of oxygen and thus displaces oxygen from the hemoglobin, causing an overall toxic effect. Now, since methylene blue is used in the context of methemoglobinemia, there might be a potential drug interaction between methylene blue and Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate. I did my absolute due diligence looking for scientific evidence, but I could find none of it. So this is a speculated beneficial drug interaction from my personal experience combining methylene blue with Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate. I would say that the oxygen enhancing effects are very pronounced. And I also couldn't find any scientific evidence that Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate increases the affinity of hemoglobin for nitric oxide, carbon dioxide, or hydrogen ions, or other ions for that matter. Now, that doesn't mean that's not the case. It simply means it hasn't been investigated as of now yet. And maybe in the future, with more scientific evidence coming to the forefront of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate, it might make L-citrulline or beta-alanine or baking soda, for that matter, completely obsolete. And then instead of taking these vanilla over-the-counter pre-workout formulations, we stick with a low and moderate dose of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate to have an increased effect regarding oxygen carrying capacity, an increased effect regarding the removal of carbon dioxide and the delivery of nitric oxide, and again, the removal of hydrogen ions, right? There's a lot of scientific evidence that still needs to be performed, but for now, I would say that Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate has very potential beneficial properties, which hopefully with time will come to the forefront as more scientific evidence is performed on this particular compound. For the maximum beneficial effects of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate to take place, we obviously need to increase our hemoglobin content and concentration within red blood cells. We can stimulate erythropoiesis and increase hemoglobin content and red blood cell count and hematocrit with the following methods and compounds. I don't want to spend too much time on these because we already went quite in depth during the Endless Endurance video or the Optimized Endurance Deep Dive video series. I've linked all of those down below in case you want to get more additional information about these erythropoiesis-stimulating and oxygen carrying capacity enhancing compounds. So let's go over it real briefly. You can use altitude masks, living at high altitude, a hyperbaric altitude chamber, look into vitamin A, whether that's beta-carotene or retinol, look into vitamin B9 folate, or also known as folic acid, or vitamin B12, cobalamin, look into vitamin C, ascorbic acid, copper, iron. All of these micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals, contribute to the production of red blood cells and hemoglobin. If you want to keep it simple, even though supplements are never a good replacement for your diet, but if you want to keep it simple, go with Gorilla Mind Elite Multivitamin in combination with Gorilla Mind Beef Liver capsules, which contain iron. The multivitamin doesn't contain iron. Again, these are a supplement on top of a healthy diet with adequate amounts of nutrients, the vitamins, and the minerals which contribute to red blood cell production and hemoglobin production. But if you do a combination of both, then I think your erythropoiesis and your hemoglobin and your hematocrit and your blood cell count should be more than optimal for you to supplement Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate in. Like I mentioned before, look into methylene blue or look into boldenone andestinate, also known as equipoise, or methanolone enanthate, also known as primobolan, or methanolone acetate, also known as primobolan S, or oxymetholone, anadrol, or erythropoietin methoxy polyethylene glycol epoetin beta, also known as Mircera, or darbepoetin alpha, also known as RNESP. And all of these last mentioned compounds, whether those are the anabolic androgenic steroids, the oral ones, or the erythropoietic derivatives, are all used medically in the treatment of anemia. Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate has been investigated as a potential anti-cancer drug candidate during a clinical trial back in 2015, which is over 10 years ago. I've summarized the results for easy digestibility, as the accompanying study publication is a bit hard to interpret. The pending brand name of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate was Oxy-111A, not oxymetholone, but Oxy-111A. The investigated conditions of this single clinical trial was the maximum tolerable dose of ITPP in patients with secondary hepato, pancreato, and biliary neoplasm, pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, colorectal cancer, liver metastasis, or hepatocellular carcinoma. The sample size was 28. The investigated treatment duration was 3 weeks, with a follow-up duration between 10 days to 5 months. The investigated dosages, and here is where we start to run into problems, but don't worry, I already did the conversion for you guys. We'll address that a little bit later on. The investigated dosages were between 1866 milligrams ITPP per cubic meter up until 14,500 milligrams ITPP per cubic meter, 3 times weekly for 3 weeks through intravenous administration. The reported half-life in this clinical trial was between 1.3 to 3.3 hours based on the intravenous administration, not by oral administration, which is generally how we take ITTP for recreational endurance and stamina purposes. And the reported beneficial effects were decreased angiogenic biomarkers, which is beneficial in the context of resolving various kinds of cancers, improved disease stability and chemotherapy treatment outcome. The reported side effects were elevated diastolic blood pressure, but that was below 20 points, but this was only observed at the higher dosage groups. upper respiratory tract infection and fluid buildup in the abdomen, but this was likely due to cancer progression, not from the treatment or administration of ITPP. Reported blood work parameter changes were as follows: decreased vascular endothelial growth factor levels, decreased angiopoietin-1 and angiopoietin-2 levels, decreased epidermal growth factor levels, decreased platelet endothelial cell adhesion molecule levels, also known as cluster of differentiation 3-1, hyperkalemia due to the co-administration of calcium chloride, because Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate has calcium chelating properties, more on this later. And the other reported side effects were hyponatremia, that's low sodium levels, hypokalemia, that's low potassium levels, hypomagnesemia, and hypophosphatemia. What a mouthful. And the maximum tolerable dose based on the single clinical trials was up to 12,390 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate per cubic meter. Now, here's the problem. Milligrams per cubic meter isn't a very tangible number we can use to extrapolate a milligram per kilogram of body weight range with. As always, I did my absolute best to calculate this milligram per cubic meter to milligram per kilogram of body weight, so you don't have to, and then we can use that to interpret the rest of the scientific evidence regarding what kind of beneficial effects we can expect from a single human clinical trials, because all of the other scientific evidence is based on animal models. The additional problem is that in order to calculate milligrams per cubic meter to milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight, we have to use the average body surface area and average body weight of humans, and then specify that for both men and women. And finding the average weight for men and women is already problematic enough, because I'm sure you guys understand that the average weight of humans, whether those are men or women from the Western world, like America, Australia, Europe, etc., is a little bit different than the average weight of humans, men or women, in Asia or other parts of the world. There's a huge discrepancy there, maybe 10%, 20% discrepancy in overall body weight and potentially overall body surface area. Again, this was a bit of a brain bender. I might have made some mistakes here or there. I reverse engineered the formulas once I was done with the calculations, converting milligram per kilogram of body weight back to milligrams per cubic meter, and I got comparable results. If you want to point out my mistakes, though, do so in the comment section. Just do me a solid, please be gentle, and use some Astroglide before you get into it. In the clinical trial, the investigated dosage range was between 1,866 milligrams to 1,200-390 milligrams ITPP per cubic meter. We're not including the highest investigated dosage because that's where all of the side effects were generally observed. This was administered intravenously 3 times weekly for 3 weeks, so that's 9 administrations in total. The average body surface area of humans is 1.78 cubic meters. For men, that's between 1.87 to 1.91 cubic meters. And for women, that's between 1.66 to 1.71 cubic meters. The average body weight globally is 62 kilos, aka 136.7 pounds. It's quite light from what I would say. And in the bodybuilding community, that's basically 1 dumbbell for dumbbell rows. The average body weight globally for men is 65 to 90.6 kilograms, which is 143.3 to 199.8 pounds. And for women, that's 49.8 to 77.5 kilograms. 77.5. Wow. Which is 109.8 pounds to 170.8 pounds. Man, some of you girls are thick AF. And it brings us to the converted dosage range. The dose per 1 kilogram of body weight is anywhere between 16.9 to 112.3 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate for men and women combined, based on their average body surface area and average body weight. But if you want to differentiate between men and women, the dosage would be for men between 10.8 milligrams to 101.9 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate per 1 kilogram of body weight. And for women, that's 14.1 milligrams to 149.9 milligrams ITPP per 1 kilogram of body weight. And using this range to convert that to the weight of a bodybuilder or fitness enthusiast or an endurance athlete, and I'll leave that entirely up to you. For a 100 kilogram bodybuilder, and the rest of the details are on the screen, obviously, that would be between 1,080 milligrams to 15,000 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate intravenously 3 times weekly, which is reasonably high, that higher end of the range. But at the lower end of the range, that would basically mean 500 milligrams Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate intravenously daily, and you might be able to get a comparable effect if you administer that orally instead. Now, I don't think that any of us are after the anti-cancer, anti-tumor, or anti-angiogenic effects of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate because angiogenesis is beneficial for endurance and stamina to allow for increased blood flow to metabolically active tissues. And if you impair that, if you impair the hypoxia signaling resulting in angiogenesis, then, the vascular endothelial growth factor and all of the other growth factors which are necessary for improved angiogenesis are somewhat reduced, and then in the long run, endurance and stamina might be hindered. And it's especially important not to combine Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate when you're upregulating angiogenesis with compounds like TB500, BPC157, etc. Using some highly dubious extrapolation and calculations, the calcium chelating effects were observed at approximately 22.6 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight onwards. So that means for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder, that would mean a dose of 2,260 milligrams Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, where calcium levels and the other electrolyte levels in the bloodstream might start to deplete, which is double the anti-tumor or anti-cancer dose for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder, and probably 2 to 3 to 4 times the dose of what I would generally recommend. So these dosage ranges I would consider to be the maximum tolerable dose, even though it's the lowest effective dose based on the clinical trial. But again, in the clinical trials, even though the side effects are minimal regarding blood pressure, the effects on angiogenesis and calcium chelation is something I would likely want to avoid if I use this compound for longer periods of time. Okay, with the clinical trial out of the way, let's get into the evidence-based unique characteristics of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate and see what else we can find in scientific evidence. ITPP increases the oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin and the oxygen release from red blood cells without altering serum hematocrit or total red blood cell count, stemming from human subjects, animal models, and in vitro studies using human red blood cells. ITPP sustains oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin and oxygen release from red blood cells during increased serum acidity, which is known as the Bohr effect. The Bohr effect means that as serum acidity goes up, the oxygen carrying capacity and the oxygen affinity of hemoglobin goes down. So if you're dumping a lot of acids, the hydrogen ions or other metabolic waste products during strenuous activity, the oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin actually goes down, and thus the oxygen delivery to metabolically active tissue is decreased as well, impairing your performance, endurance, and stamina. So Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate might actually mitigate this effect to a certain extent and improve and sustain oxygen delivery to metabolically active tissue, even if the acidity of the bloodstream goes up to a certain extent. ITPP was shown to have a dose-dependent increase in hemoglobin oxygen binding affinity up to 31% and an increase in exercise capacity up to 57% in an animal model using mice. You can see that that was observed after a single administration of 500 milligrams ITPP to 3,000 milligrams ITPP per 1 kilogram of body weight by intraperitoneal injection. That's straight into the abdomen. And that would mean between 40.5 milligrams to 243.2 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight for humans, albeit through intramuscular administration, which I feel intraperitoneal versus intramuscular has similar pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. When ITPP is administered orally in an animal model using mice, it increases hemoglobin oxygen binding affinity by only 16%, so that's approximately half of what we discussed through intraperitoneal injection, and the exercise capacity only increased by 34%, still approximately half, give or take. This was observed at 20 milligrams Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate per 1 milliliters of water consumed as needed, which is ad libitum. A mice usually consumes approximately 5.8 milliliters of water over the day, resulting in a total intake of ITPP of about 116 milligrams, and this was administered daily between 4 to 8 days. And if you convert that to humans, that would be 9.4 milligrams per 1 kilogram body weight orally daily, again, for multiple days in succession, which is about 940 milligrams per 1 kilogram bodybuilder, which is well beyond the dosage recommendations that we're going to make a little bit later on in this video. ITPP has a dose-dependent increase in exercise capacity up to 71% in animal models using transgenic mice with severe heart failure. This was observed after a single administration between 1,000 milligrams and 2,000 milligrams ITPP per 1 kilogram of body weight by intraperitoneal injection, which is between 81.1 to 162.2 milligrams ITPP per 1 kilogram of body weight intramuscularly daily for humans. ITPP decreases hypoxia-inducible factor 1 messenger RNA expression by 61.9% in the myocardium in an animal model using mice. Again, the dosage calculations are on the screen because it's very similar to the previous one. And ITPP doesn't offer any vasodilating effects stemming from the same animal model using mice. There was no effects on heart rate, no effects on systolic or diastolic blood pressure. And again, the dosage ranges and the human equivalent dose details are on the screen. And using all of the aforementioned scientific evidence on the animal models using mice, this dosage range converting the animal dose to the human equivalent dose, that would be between 940.5 milligrams to, let's say, 24,300 milligrams for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder, and even 940 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate daily for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder when administered orally. I would say that dose that is way too high and not dosages I would generally recommend. ITPP attenuates cellular hypoxia, which reduces vascular endothelial growth factor and hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha levels, stemming from an in vitro study using human red blood cells, which reduces hypoxia-induced angiogenesis. Now, again, this is an in vitro study, so we can't really extrapolate a dosage range for human individuals from this data, but it does mean that angiogenesis might be impaired, especially if you ramp up the dose of ITTP beyond what is recommended to improve your endurance and stamina. And this might actually hinder your endurance and stamina or impair wound healing if you do this for longer periods of time. But on the flip side of that, ITTP administration might actually restore liver function and prevent liver failure after hepatectomy, which is the removal of a significant amount of liver tissue from the liver during surgery. ITPP normalizes steatosis and metabolic or regenerative deficiencies post-surgery, again, an animal model using mice. ITTP was shown to reduce hypoxia-inducible factor 2 alpha, which is primarily found in the liver. It restores downstream peroxisome proliferator activated receptor alpha and peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma coactivator 1A expression, which contributes to mitochondrial function. And this was observed at a single administration of either 25 milligrams or 500 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate per 1 kilogram of body weight intravenously before surgery, which translates to 2 milligrams or 40.5 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight for humans. So even though ITTP administration before surgery might lower angiogenesis and delay the recovery of liver function in this context, it might promote mitochondrial function and thus the overall antioxidant status and energy production within the liver, again in this context, might be upregulated. And then as ITTP gets out of the bloodstream, this angiogenesis returns. And with upregulated mitochondrial function, this increased angiogenesis, which occurs after surgery, restores liver function and prevents liver failure. It's a little bit of an extrapolation. The scientific evidence really didn't go this much in depth, but I'm just using basic human biology and knowing how the mitochondria and angiogenesis biomarkers functions in the process of recovery. So again, if you had surgery, maybe a single administration of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate might improve the outcome of surgery, but prolonged administration of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate post-surgery is probably not recommended because you're suppressing angiogenesis for longer periods of time and you need the angiogenesis for recovery overall. ITPP might be a potential treatment option for various cardiovascular diseases, including heart disease, adverse cardiac remodeling, aka heart enlargement. That's very promising for guys who train insane and have elevated blood pressure, obviously. You don't want left ventricular hypertrophy, and Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate, again based on animal models and in vitro studies, might be able to prevent that from happening, including something like an angiotensin receptor blocker or a beta blocker, which also is known to prevent negative cardiac remodeling. ITPP might be a potential treatment option for coronary artery disease, pulmonary hypertension, and organ hypoxia, stemming from animal models using either mice or rats, and in vitro studies using cardiomyocytes. And these studies show that ITTP reverses hypoxia-induced and ischemia-induced cardiac injury. ITPP has promising anti-cancer and anti-tumor properties stemming from human subjects, that single clinical trial we just highlighted. and various animal models using rats or mice, and in vitro studies using various cancer cell lines. ITTP activates tumor suppressor gene phosphate and tensin homolog. ITTP inhibits phosphoinositide 3 kinase. It reduces vascular endothelial growth factor and hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha levels. It reduced angiogenesis overall, and it might have a synergistic effects with oxygen-dependent anti-tumor therapies like radio, photo, and immunotherapy. And lastly, Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate has calcium chelating properties stemming from that single human clinical trial. It depletes serum electrolytes, particularly serum calcium levels, unless that's exogenously administered at the same time they administer ITPP intravenously. This was observed at higher dosages beyond 22.6 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight intravenously 3 times weekly. Not entirely sure if that translates to oral Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate administrations, which probably have a lower bioavailability compared to intravenous administrations. And again, that will be 2,260 milligrams per 100 kilogram bodybuilder, which is generally not something I would recommend. And I never see in the bodybuilding or endurance sports community. I will tell you this, I've done plenty of blood work on Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate, as many of my consultation clients have done blood work on ITPP, and none of them experience any kind of depletion in serum electrolyte levels, and serum calcium levels stay exactly within normal parameters, don't even budge. So I don't think this is something to worry about. But again, if you escalate the dose upwards for whatever crazy reason, maybe you have cancer and that's why you want to increase it. But if you're otherwise healthy, I don't see a reason to do it. But if you escalate the dose upwards, you might have, again, anti-angiogenesis and reduction in serum electrolyte levels, especially calcium levels, which would ultimately affect your blood pressure and overall performance. So don't do that. Obviously, the beneficial effects regarding the treatments of various cardiovascular diseases and the anti-cancer and anti-tumor properties of Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate, all stemming from animal models, are summarized in this study. It's well worth the read in case you're interested in these additional beneficial effects. Performed by Okninska et al., published in October 2022, titled New Potential Treatment for Cardiovascular Disease Through Modulation of Hemoglobin Oxygen Binding Curve, Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate from Cancer to Cardiovascular Disease. Regarding the beneficial effects of various kinds of cancer, these were observed at 500 milligrams to 4,000 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight in mice and 1,500 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight in rats, which translates to the human equivalent dose of approximately 40.5 to 324.32 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight, or about 4,000 milligrams to 32,000 milligrams for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder. And the beneficial effects on the treatment of cardiovascular diseases were observed between 500 milligrams to 3,000 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight in mice, and again 1,500 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight in rats, which translates to a human equivalent dose between 40.5 to 243.2 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight, aka 4,000 milligrams to 24,000 milligrams for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder. And at these dosages, you might experience impaired angiogenesis, excessive calcium chelation, and elevated blood pressure. But if you suffer from cardiovascular disease and cancer, then these side effects are probably a non-issue for you. And it brings us to the dosing protocols, which fall well below the investigated dosing protocols, whether that's in animal models or human clinical trials. So I highly doubt you have to worry about calcium chelation or blood pressure increases or impaired angiogenesis for that matter, unless you really start ramping up the dosage upwards, which is not something I recommend, because at lower dosages, you already get the endurance and stamina boosting benefits. And it's still, if you use ITPP for longer periods of time, you might be experiencing some side effects down the road. And again, based on my own blood work results, I don't see any changes to my serum calcium levels. And I consume approximately 1,500 milligrams of calcium from dietary sources and supplemental sources over the day. For men and women, the sustainable and tolerable dose for Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate at the loading phase, lasting 2 to 3 weeks for you to get these beneficial effects regarding your endurance and stamina, is between 100 milligrams to 250 milligrams ITPP upon waking daily, for a total weekly intake between 700 milligrams to 1,750 milligrams. I would prefer 250 milligrams over 100 milligrams Myo-Inositol trispyrophosphate, because that seems to give a more pronounced effect regarding endurance, stamina, cognition, memory recollection, and overall productivity, and that builds it up a little bit faster. So you can take the creatine monohydrate route. Instead of going on 5 grams creatine monohydrate for multiple days, you go with 10 grams for 1 or 2 weeks, and then your muscle creatine stores are completely saturated, and then you drop it down to a maintenance dose, similar with Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate. You increase the intake daily, and then you drop down to a maintenance phase with the same dose between 100 milligrams to 250 milligrams ITPP upon waking, but then 3 times weekly to sustain the beneficial effects regarding the oxygen affinity to hemoglobin and the overall oxygen carrying capacity and delivery of your blood by keeping it at a maintenance dose between 300 milligrams to 750 milligrams ITPP weekly. And the deleterious dose for both men and women based on the clinical trials would be over 22.6 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight, administered 3 times weekly through intravenous administrations. Again, that's based on the calcium chelating effects, which might lower your serum electrolyte levels over time and impair your performance and endurance and stamina over to a certain extent. And again, a little bit of caution is advised. Combining Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate when you're undergoing surgery, maybe before surgery, it can have a beneficial effect. But after surgery, when you want angiogenesis to take place, then I would exclude Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate for actually 12 days, because based on the animal models, the oxygen carrying capacity and oxygen affinity of hemoglobin was sustained after multiple administrations of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate for about 12 days. Even though ITPP is detectable in serum and urine for approximately 24 hours, the oxygen carrying capacity and oxygen affinity for hemoglobin is sustained for up to 12 days. Again, it's stemming from an animal model. I couldn't find that in human scientific evidence because, well, there's not much to go by besides that single clinical trial. So I would abstain from ITPP before surgery, and if you want to recover from injuries, especially if you're taking angiogenic compounds like TB500 or BPC157 and whatnot. And then as soon as you're recovered from that injury, the wound is closed and you can go back to the gym again where your endurance and stamina needs to be boosted to an all-time high. Then, well, you start with the loading phase and transition into the maintenance phase as soon as the beneficial effects become apparent. Anecdotally, people report that ITPP increases their overall cardiovascular endurance, stamina, and performance, regardless of the sport that they like to perform. It happens in bodybuilding, happens in fitness, well, you guys know what that sport is. Strongman, endurance, cycling, MMA, any kind of sport. ITPP is very beneficial to improve cardiovascular endurance, stamina, and overall performance. And people also report that it has nootropic properties, and this happens in as little as a couple of days. So they notice that the concentration improves, mood, focus, mental clarity, memory recollection, and overall productivity all improve within a couple of days of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate administration during the loading phase, even though the enhancement regarding endurance and stamina might take a little bit longer to manifest. So within the first week of ITPP during the loading phase, you might already notice that it improves your cognition and has nootropic effects. And then in week 2 or 3, you might start to notice that endurance and performance and stamina in the gym increases as well. Now, I experienced all of this myself. In the beginning, you feel more productive, and then later on, you feel a lot more stamina in the gym. Win-win. Some people report that ITPP improved their overall sleep quality. I'm not entirely sure if these people suffer from sleep apnea or snore quite a bit, impairing their overall oxygen intake throughout the night. Now, since ITPP increases the oxygen affinity and oxygen delivery to metabolically active tissue, it does make sense that if you suffer from sleep apnea or snore quite a bit, or use mouth tape while your nose is clogged from a common cold, then ITPP can definitely enhance your sleep quality because your sleep quality is so atrocious without attacking the root cause. And I'm not entirely sure how ITPP regarding sleep quality compares to something like growth hormone or cerebrolysin or both, or delta sleep inducing peptide or melatonin. That I'm not entirely sure. I always sleep well, whether I take ITPP, growth hormone, or cerebrolysin or not, even though cerebrolysin makes me wake up super refreshed and very well rested. Too bad it's not available anymore. I've read that ITPP has a more pronounced effect when you take it sublingually, allegedly due to a difference in bioavailability comparing oral ITPP administration to sublingual administration. I've tried both in the past. I couldn't find or notice a difference. So I took sublingual ITPP for, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks during the loading phase, and then I switched to a maintenance phase using oral ITPP, and overall the beneficial effects regarding stamina, endurance, and cognition were sustained. Now, I'm not entirely sure if you go with oral ITP administration during the loading phase and then go to sublingual administration during the maintenance phase, if you notice a bit of a difference or maybe even a boost compared to the loading phase orally to a maintenance phase sublingually, which allegedly should have increased bioavailability and thus a more pronounced effect. I couldn't find anything in scientific evidence comparing oral administration to intravenous or sublingual administration directly. And even though there's a clear difference in overall exercise capacity and the oxygen carrying capacity and oxygen affinity of hemoglobin, comparing one animal model using a single intraperitoneal administration of ITPP versus a multiple day administration of ITPP when dissolved in water and consumed ad libitum, the dosages are not the same. The duration of the study is not the same. The administration route is obviously different, which is what we're after here. But there's too much discrepancy in the dosing and the duration of the study, meaning that you can't really extrapolate too much from the scientific evidence, showing about 50% effectivity regarding exercise capacity and the oxygen carrying capacity of hemoglobin, comparing intraperitoneal administrations to oral administrations. In the anecdotal reports, I've read that ITTP offers a more pronounced effect regarding endurance and stamina and overall performance in the gym or other various sports compared to either Cardarine or Mildronate, which you shouldn't combine because Cardarine shifts energy production to fatty acids and Mildronate does that to glucose. So they compare ITTP to Cardarine or Mildronate, and in both comparisons, ITTP wins. Something I have to agree with. I feel that the effects of ITTP are far more pronounced regarding endurance, stamina, and nootropic benefits, which I get none from Cardarine or Mildronate. But I would say that it's better to combine both, right? You can easily combine Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate with either Cardarine or Mildronate. I'll leave that decision entirely up to you. The problem is that ITPP is somewhat expensive and not as cost effective as nasal strips or a peak O2 adaptogen mushroom blends or a methylene blue for that matter, or Cardarine or Mildronate, right? ITPP is the most expensive compound in this stack, but if you can afford all of them, then a combination of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate with nasal strips, with methylene blue, with the adaptogen mushroom blend contained within peak O2, and either Cardarine or Mildronate, stamina galore, right? That is the ultimate stamina boosting hack and something you should look into if you're really after endless endurance, like I mentioned in that previous video. Talking about performance enhancing benefits, even though Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate isn't specifically mentioned in the World Anti-Doping Agency prohibited list of 2025, it might still be banned under M1.2, artificially enhancing the uptake, transport, or delivery of oxygen. I mean, with water, you never know. If they want you to fill, they'll make you fill, no exceptions. However, ITTP is specifically banned in various sports or federations, including horse racing. So let's have a quick look into the potential detection times of ITPP, albeit that there's not much to go with. The reported half-life is between 1.3 to 3.3 hours based on intravenous administrations. The reported active life based on the hemoglobin oxygen carrying effects is up to 12 days based on intraperitoneal and oral administrations. The detection methods include, well, it's on the screen, it's impossible to pronounce. The detection limit of ITPP in urine is between 1 nanograms to 15 nanograms per milliliter, and based on a single study using horses, where 200 milligrams Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate was administered intravenously. In urine, it was detectable up to 24 hours, and in serum up to 6 hours. But they didn't look at the metabolites of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, so this is not a proper excretion study. We can't really extrapolate anything to human urine for this matter. So for now, I would have to say that the detection time is unknown, and if you want to play it safe, at least 24 hours after the last administration, but preferably over 12 days, as a little bit of Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate remains attached within the hemoglobin, as these beneficial effects regarding the oxygen affinity for hemoglobin are observed up to 12 days. So this is all we have to work with. If you have any experience with Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, please let us know your anecdotal results down below in the comments section. Did they give you endless endurance and improved cognition to the point you're now considering a promising career in either tennis or biathlon? Let us know down below. Did ITPP alter any of your blood work parameters? Did it raise your blood pressure? Did it drop your capacity for wound healing by impairing angiogenesis? Did it drop your serum electrolyte levels, bottoming out your serum calcium levels to absolutely zero, impairing your performance and endurance with longer usage? Share away down below in the comment section. We would all love to hear about it. And then we'll discuss all of these posts and questions and answers at the Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate addendum live stream dropping a couple days from now. If you do a lot of self-experimentation, you should do your blood work, as do I, every single month, before, during, and after. Very important for you to do your blood work when you're taking these kinds of compounds that are not FDA approved and have very limited human scientific evidence. You can extrapolate from the animal models, but it only goes so far. Do your blood work to see how these compounds affect your overall health, besides the beneficial effects that you might experience for performance enhancement. If you live in the United States, you can do your blood work over at Merck Health. They have excellent healthcare providers and patient care coordinators who can help you interpret your blood work results, allowing you to stay healthy while you're undergoing a lot of self-experimentation. If you need personalized advice, you need my help interpreting your blood work results. We can either do that during a consultation or by email. You can find the rates on my website linked down below. And you should bookmark my website, vigoroussteve.com, so you have access to the information at all times, especially for sponsors and affiliates you can't find. Down below in the YouTube description section, all my sponsors and affiliates are usually there, and otherwise, again, they're on my website. Vigorous crew, you know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys, fully enhanced by Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate Intellis Endurance. I don't need to breathe at all, but when I do breathe, it's usually quite deep because, again, the methylene blue, the Pico-2, and whatnot is enhancing my experience with Myo-Inositol Trispyrophosphate, and the combination of multiple compounds instead of megadosing one is what I prefer. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.